Moonlight spills across the Giza Plateau, turning limestone into pale fire and shadow. 3 colossal forms rise where time should have erased them, precision locked into stone so exact it feels deliberate beyond human habit. Every angle insists on intent. Every joint whispers calculation. The Great Pyramid does not feel ancient in the way ruins do. It feels finished, as if it has been waiting rather than decaying. Official history offers clean answers: kings, dynasties, tombs, but the stone resists simplicity. Millions of tons lifted, aligned to true north with surgical accuracy, engineered on a scale that strains even modern logic. Granite hauled from hundreds of miles away, cut as if softened, fitted tighter than paper seams. This is where doubt begins to breathe. Not denial of Egypt's brilliance, but a deeper unease, whether what we call construction was instead inheritance, whether the builders were creators or caretakers of something already impossibly old. The pyramids stand silent, but silence does not mean emptiness. It means the question has survived intact. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The Great Pyramid confronts the body before it reaches the mind. Standing at its base, scale collapses language. Stone blocks the size of delivery trucks rise in stacked certainty, each one placed with a confidence that refuses improvisation. This is not mass piled upward, it is mass disciplined. The structure does not taper casually toward the sky, but narrows according to a precise ratio, a geometry that locks the entire monument into balance. Its footprint covers more than 13 acres, yet the base is leveled so accurately that the difference between corners measures in mere centimeters. To achieve that today, engineers rely on lasers, GPS, and computer modeling. Here, the leveling was done on bare bedrock, with no visible margin for correction. More than 2 million stone blocks compose the pyramid. The average weight hovers around 2.5 tons, already an enormous logistical challenge, but averages conceal extremes. Deep inside, in the king's chamber, rest granite beams weighing between 50 and 80 tons each. Granite is not local stone. It came from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Transporting such masses, even with modern cranes and trucks, demands planning, infrastructure, and energy. In the context of the Old Kingdom, where copper tools dulled quickly and wheeled transport was not used for heavy loads, the presence of these beams feels disruptive, like a sentence that does not belong to the paragraph around it. Precision sharpens the unease. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an error of only a few arc minutes, a level of accuracy that modern surveyors respect. True north is not magnetic north. It requires long-term astronomical observation, tracking stars over time to establish the Earth's rotational axis. This alignment is not symbolic. It is mechanical, as if orientation itself mattered to the function of the structure. Each face is slightly concave, a subtle inward curve detectable only under specific lighting conditions, visible from the air at dawn and dusk during the equinoxes. This is not decoration. It serves no aesthetic purpose visible from the ground. It exists because someone thought it needed to exist. The mortar binding the stones complicates the picture further. It is not simple mud or lime paste. chemical analysis shows a composition stronger in some cases than the limestone it binds. Even today, its exact recipe remains difficult to replicate. The outer casing stones, once polished white limestone from Tura, were fitted so tightly that a blade could barely slide between them. When intact, the pyramid would have gleamed like a mirror, reflecting sunlight so intensely that it may have been visible from miles away, a geometric sun frozen into the earth. Conventional Egyptology responds with context. The pyramid, we are told, was built around 2560 BCE as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty. Construction took roughly 20 years, using a rotating workforce of skilled laborers, not slaves. Archaeological excavations at the workers' city near Giza reveal bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves a day, evidence of meat-heavy diets, organized housing, and medical care. These people were valued specialists participating in a national project tied to religious devotion. The narrative is coherent, humane, and supported by material evidence. Purpose is also provided. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending, but a transition. The pharaoh, a divine intermediary, needed a vehicle to ascend to the heavens, to join Ra, the sun god, and to become an imperishable star among the circumpolar constellations that never set. The pyramid served as that vehicle, a resurrection machine aligned to the cosmos. Narrow shafts extending from the king's and queen's chambers point toward specific stars as they appeared in the sky over 4,000 years ago. These shafts are often mislabeled as ventilation ducts, but their alignment suggests ritual intent rather than airflow. Yet intention does not dissolve mechanics. Knowing why something was built does not explain how it was executed. The dominant explanation relies on ramps, long straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, spiral ramps, or internal ramps hidden within the structure. Each proposal solves one problem while creating others. A straight ramp long enough to reach the pyramid's apex would require more material than the pyramid itself. A spiral ramp would obstruct precise corner measurements. Internal ramp theories are elegant but largely inferential, supported by indirect evidence and computer modeling rather than direct remains. The argument for gradual development is often invoked. Khufu did not emerge from nothing. His father, Sneferu, experimented relentlessly with pyramid design. The pyramid at Midum collapsed, likely due to a miscalculated angle. The bent pyramid at Dashur preserves a visible mid-construction correction, its slope altered to prevent structural failure. The Red Pyramid, also at Dashur, achieved the first successful true pyramid with smooth sides. In this view, the Great Pyramid represents the culmination of decades of trial and error, an accelerated but plausible learning curve. For centuries, however, one critical element was missing: contemporary documentation. The pyramid itself contains no inscriptions proclaiming Khufu's authorship. There are no hieroglyphic reliefs inside the main chambers, no funerary texts, no declarations of ownership. Only rough quarry marks, graffiti left by work gangs, appear in hidden relieving chambers above the king's chamber. Skeptics long argued these marks could have been added later, forged by 19th-century explorers eager to confirm accepted chronology. That gap narrowed dramatically in 2013 with the discovery of papyri at Wadi al-Jarf, a Red Sea harbor dating to Khufu's reign. Among them was the diary of an official named Merer, an inspector overseeing teams transporting limestone from the Tura quarries to Giza. Written in red and black ink, the log records daily activities, deliveries, and routes. Crucially, Merer names the destination, Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, the ancient name of the Great Pyramid. The document is the oldest papyrus ever found in Egypt and a direct link between Khufu's administration and the pyramid. For Orthodox scholarship, this was decisive. The pyramid belonged to Khufu. His officials managed its supply lines. His reign coincided with its construction. The case appeared closed, yet doubt does not vanish. It mutates. Merer's diary confirms that Khufu oversaw work at the pyramid, but it does not specify the nature of that work beyond transporting high-quality casing stone. It documents finishing, not beginnings. It proves ownership, not origin. The distinction matters because the pyramid's most perplexing features, the massive granite core elements, the extraordinary precision, the apparent over-engineering, do not sit comfortably within the known technological profile of the period. The question quietly shifts. It is no longer whether the Egyptians were capable, because clearly they were. It becomes whether everything visible at Giza belongs to the same moment in time, the same technological context, the same hands. Stone does not carry timestamps. Erosion, alignment, and tool marks become the only witnesses left to interrogate. Standing before the Great Pyramid, the impression is not of a prototype perfected, but of a solution executed without hesitation. There is no visible learning curve in its final form. It rises fully confident, as if the builders already knew the outcome before laying the first stone. That confidence is what unsettles, not ignorance of method, but surplus of intent. The pyramid feels less like an experiment, and more like a completion, less like an invention, and more like the last movement of a much longer, unseen composition. And if that is true, the plateau itself becomes suspect, not merely as a construction site, but as a location chosen for reasons deeper than convenience. Beneath the sand, beneath the limestone casing stripped away by later centuries, something older may be embedded. The stone does not answer, but it does not forget either. It waits, bearing marks not only of chisels and hands, but of time itself, ready to be read by those willing to listen past the comfort of settled history. If the Great Pyramid unsettles through scale and precision, the structure beside it unsettles through age. The Great Sphinx does not rise from stacked blocks or assembled courses. It emerges directly from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, carved from a single limestone ridge left behind when the surrounding stone was quarried away. It is not constructed, it is released. 73 meters long and 20 meters high, the body of a reclining lion stretches eastward, its gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun lifts itself from the desert at the equinox. The head wears the Nemes headdress of a pharaoh, but the proportions feel strained. The head is too small, almost apologetic atop a body built for something larger. Orthodox chronology assigns the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, Khufu's son, dating its carving to around 2500 BCE. The logic appears tidy. The Sphinx aligns with Khafre's causeway. The valley temple nearby uses similar stone. The face, worn though it is, bears stylistic resemblance to Khafre's statues. As a guardian figure, the Sphinx fits neatly into Egypt's symbolic language of royal power. The narrative is symmetrical and efficient, which is precisely why the stone itself becomes problematic. The Sphinx is severely eroded, but not in the way other monuments on the plateau are. Wind erosion in a desert environment scours stone horizontally, sharpening edges and undercutting surfaces where sand is driven by prevailing winds. The pyramids show this signature clearly. The Sphinx does not. Its body and the walls of the enclosure surrounding it are marked by deep vertical fissures and rounded, undulating surfaces. The stone looks softened, as if repeatedly soaked and dried. To an untrained eye, this is simply age. To a geologist, it is diagnostic. Vertical erosion of this kind is produced by rainfall, not wind. Water falls from above, runs downward, and slowly dissolves limestone, creating channels that widen over long periods. The critical problem is climatic. Since around 2500 BCE, the Giza Plateau has existed in an arid environment. Rainfall has been minimal for thousands of years. The last time Egypt experienced sustained heavy rains was during the African humid period, a climatic phase when the Sahara was green, dotted with lakes and grasslands, and fed by monsoon systems. That period ended between roughly 5000 and 4000 BCE. This observation was first articulated in the mid-20th century by R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, a French philosopher and self-taught Egyptologist who approached ancient monuments as symbolic organisms rather than static artifacts. His suggestion that the Sphinx predated dynastic Egypt was dismissed as speculative. Decades later, the idea resurfaced with sharper tools. In the 1990s, author John Anthony West brought the erosion question to a professional geologist, Robert Schoch of Boston University. Schoch had no stake in Egyptian dynasties or historical timelines. His expertise lay in reading stone. Examining the Sphinx and its enclosure, he concluded that the erosion patterns were consistent with long-term exposure to rainfall, not desert wind or Nile flooding. The erosion is most severe on the upper portions of the body and enclosure walls, precisely where rain would have the greatest effect. Rising groundwater or capillary action from the Nile would erode from the bottom up, not top-down. Salt crystallization, another proposed mechanism, produces flaking and granular decay, not the smooth wave-like contours observed. Schoch's conservative conclusion was seismic. The Sphinx, he argued, must have been carved before the onset of hyper-arid conditions, placing its origin at least several thousand years earlier than the Fourth Dynasty. His minimum estimate placed it between 5000 and 7000 BCE, with the possibility of a much earlier date. If correct, the Sphinx would predate not only Khafra, but the unification of Egypt, the invention of hieroglyphs, and the beginning of the Bronze Age. Such a timeline forces a conceptual rupture. In 7000 BCE, conventional history describes human societies in this region as Neolithic, organized around hunting, gathering, and early pastoralism. Monumental stone sculpture on this scale does not belong to that picture, yet the stone does not negotiate with expectation. It preserves only the record of forces applied to it. The head of the Sphinx complicates matters further. Compared to the massive leonine body, the head appears disproportionately small and unusually well preserved. The facial features are less eroded than the torso, suggesting they were carved later or reworked from a previously damaged form. This discrepancy has led to a provocative hypothesis. The Sphinx may not have originally had a human head at all. If the original monument was a lion entirely, the symbolism shifts. The lion is not a casual animal in ancient iconography. It is a solar creature associated with power, guardianship, and the horizon. The Sphinx's eastward gaze aligns not only with the equinox sunrise, but with a much older astronomical context. Due to a slow wobble in Earth's axis known as the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle that shifts the background constellations over millennia, the constellation rising at the equinox changes over time. Around 10,500 BCE, the constellation Leo rose directly in the east at the spring equinox. A monumental lion gazing toward the rising sun during the age of Leo would be a literal stone reflection of the sky. This is not abstract mysticism. It is astronomical timing encoded in architecture, using the sky as a calendar too large to erase. In this scenario, the Sphinx becomes a timestamp. Its body records a wetter climate. Its orientation records a specific celestial configuration. Its head records later intervention. When dynastic Egyptians arrived at Giza, they may have encountered an already ancient monument, weathered, partially buried, and symbolically potent. Recarving the head into the likeness of a reigning pharaoh would not be theft but consecration, an act of claiming legitimacy through alignment with deep antiquity. Orthodox scholars reject this interpretation, arguing that the erosion can be explained through geological variability in the limestone and localized weathering processes. They maintain that the Sphinx belongs entirely to Khafra's reign. Yet the debate itself exposes a deeper tension. Whether stone should be interpreted primarily through textual history or physical evidence. Egyptology reads inscriptions. Geology reads landscapes. When they conflict, neither yields easily. The temples adjacent to the Sphinx add weight to the puzzle. The Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple are constructed from massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, interlocked with granite casing. Some of these limestone blocks exhibit the same rounded erosion seen on the Sphinx body, while the granite casing appears far less weathered, as if applied later. This suggests a sequence of construction and refurbishment rather than a single, unified project. If the Sphinx and parts of its associated architecture are significantly older than the pyramids, the Giza Plateau becomes layered history rather than a singular achievement. It becomes a palimpsest, a surface written on, erased, and written again across vast spans of time. The Fourth Dynasty may not have created Giza so much as inherited it, adapting older structures to fit newer religious frameworks. The implication is not that ancient Egyptians lacked brilliance, but that they may have been responding to something already extraordinary. The question shifts from authorship to recognition. Who first carved the lion from the bedrock, in an age when rain still fell on the plateau and stars marked different eras? What knowledge, what motivation, what cultural framework produced a monument that speaks simultaneously in geology and astronomy? The Sphinx does not answer. Its mouth is sealed in stone, but its body remains exposed, bearing the slow testimony of water, sky, and time. It stands not as a riddle to be solved quickly, but as a reminder that history is not always linear. Sometimes it sinks, erodes, and waits to be uncovered again, asking whether what we call the beginning was actually a return. When the sky is treated as decoration, ancient architecture seems ornamental. When the sky is treated as a mechanism, the stone begins to speak differently. For the ancient Egyptians, the heavens were not distant abstractions but a living order, a visible structure governing time death, and rebirth. Stars were not lights, they were destinations. The soul of a king was expected to travel upward, not metaphorically, but along mapped routes fixed in the night sky. This belief was not poetic indulgence, it was engineered into stone. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend from the king's chamber and the so-called queen's chamber. They are often mislabeled as ventilation ducts, though they do not serve that function. They do not reach the exterior in all cases, and their dimensions are impractical for airflow. Their angles, however, are exact. When astronomers in the 20th century calculated their trajectories, the alignments were unmistakable. Around 2500 BCE, the southern shaft of the king's chamber pointed directly toward Alnitak, one of the three stars forming Orion's belt. The northern shaft targeted Thuban, a star in the constellation Draco that at that time served as the pole star, the fixed pivot around which the sky appeared to turn. From the queen's chamber, the southern shaft aligned with Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, associated in Egyptian theology with the goddess Isis and with renewal, as its heliacal rising coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile. The northern shaft pointed toward the circumpolar stars, the so-called imperishable ones that never set below the horizon. These were not random orientations. They formed a stellar map, a set of celestial pathways encoded within the architecture itself. This already demonstrates a level of astronomical sophistication difficult to dismiss. Aligning a narrow stone shaft through hundreds of feet of masonry toward a specific star requires long-term observation, mathematical planning, and a clear understanding of precession, even if not named as such. Yet this system still fits comfortably within orthodox chronology. The shafts reflect the sky of Khufu's era. They reinforce the pyramid's role as a resurrection device for a fourth dynasty king. The problem arises when perspective widens. Belgian engineer Robert Boval did not focus on individual stars or internal shafts. He stepped back and looked at the plateau as a whole. From above, the three primary pyramids, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkora, do not form a straight line. Khufu and Khafra align closely, but Menkor is offset slightly to the east. This deviation has no structural necessity. Given the Egyptians' obsession with symmetry, it demands explanation. Boval found the explanation not on the ground, but overhead. Orion's belt consists of three stars, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. Like the pyramids, they form a nearly straight line with one star offset. The spatial relationship between the pyramids mirrors the pattern of the stars, including relative brightness. Khufu, the largest pyramid, corresponds to Alnilam, the brightest belt star. Khafre aligns with Alnitak. Menkare, smaller and offset, corresponds to Mintaka, the faintest of the three. For ancient Egyptians, Orion was not a Greek hunter. It was Osiris, god of resurrection and ruler of the afterlife. To replicate Orion on Earth was to anchor divine order into the landscape. In this interpretation, the Giza Plateau becomes a terrestrial reflection of the heavens, a place where earth and sky were deliberately synchronized. At first glance, the theory is elegant rather than radical. It complements known Egyptian theology. But Boval pursued precision, not symbolism. Using astronomical software, he reconstructed the night sky as it appeared in 2500 BCE and compared it to the pyramid layout. The correlation was close, but not exact. Due to Earth's axial precession, the orientation of Orion's belt shifts gradually over time, rotating relative to Earth's surface. In Khufu's era, the belt's angle did not perfectly match the pyramid alignment. The discrepancy was small but meaningful. In a culture obsessed with cosmic harmony, near matches are suspicious. Bauval then applied the same logic Schoch had used with geology. If the alignment is imperfect, perhaps the date is wrong. He began running the sky backward, millennia at a time, watching Orion's belt rotate through its slow cycle. The match sharpened as time rewound, past the dynasties, past the birth of writing, past agriculture. At around 10,500 BCE, the alignment locked in. At that moment, Orion's belt matched the ground plane of the pyramids with striking precision. The orientation, spacing, and relative offset converged. It was not approximate, it was exact. This date echoed another. Around 10,500 BCE, the spring equinox sunrise aligned with the constellation Leo. A lion carved into the bedrock, staring east, would have faced its celestial counterpart rising on the horizon. At the same time, the Milky Way, seen by Egyptians as a celestial river, mirrored the course of the Nile flowing past Giza. In this configuration, Earth and sky formed a unified diagram. As above, so below. If intentional, the implication is staggering. It suggests that the Giza complex encodes a celestial snapshot of the sky as it appeared at the end of the last ice age. This was not a casual alignment. It required awareness of precession, an understanding that the sky changes over vast periods. It implies planning on a timescale alien to conventional prehistoric societies. Orthodox scholarship rejects this interpretation, arguing that the correlation is subjective, that humans are pattern-seeking by nature, prone to imposing order where none exists. Yet the convergence of independent markers, stellar alignment, geological erosion, astronomical precession, begins to feel less like coincidence and more like convergence. In 10,500 BCE, the world was in upheaval. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near glacial conditions, was ending. Massive ice sheets melted. Sea levels rose catastrophically. Flood myths appear in cultures across the globe, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. Plato's account of Atlantis places its destruction in precisely this window, describing a technologically advanced society lost in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. If a civilization existed before this cataclysm, one capable of monumental construction and astronomical measurement, it would have faced annihilation. Knowledge encoded in books or fragile media would not survive. Stone and sky would. A monument aligned to stars would outlast any library. A structure anchored to bedrock would endure where cities vanished. Under this lens, Giza transforms. It is no longer merely a necropolis or a royal vanity project. It becomes a message, a marker, a way of saying, this is when we were here, this is what we knew. The 4th Dynasty Egyptians, encountering this place thousands of years later, may have recognized its power without fully understanding its origin. They restored, repurposed, and integrated it into their own cosmology, layering their sky onto an older one. This does not diminish their achievement. It reframes it. They were not imposters, but heirs, custodians of something already ancient. The pyramids become both relic and renewal, a dialogue across epochs rather than a single historical act. The sky above Giza still turns. Orion still rises and sets, its belt slowly rotating through precession. The stone remains fixed, holding an alignment that no longer matches the present. The mismatch itself becomes a clue, a fossilized moment preserved in geometry. If history is written by victors, stone may be written by time alone, recording what happened when the sky looked different, and humanity may have been older than we remember. When attention shifts from sky to stone, the mystery tightens rather than resolves. The pyramids can be admired from a distance as symbols, but up close they behave like manufactured objects, and manufactured objects preserve the logic of the tools that shaped them. Stone remembers violence. Every cut, groove, and polish is a record of force applied in a specific way. To read that record is not an act of imagination, but of forensics. The conventional image of ancient Egyptian stoneworking is modest and well catalogued. Copper chisels, wooden mallets, dolerite pounding stones, bow drills, and copper saws paired with sand as an abrasive. These tools unquestionably work on soft limestone. Much of Egypt is built from it, and the marks left by such tools are visible and consistent across temples, mastabas, and statues. The problem arises where the material changes. At Giza and other sacred sites, the builders did not limit themselves to easy stone. They chose granite, basalt, diorite, some of the hardest natural materials on Earth. Granite, brought from Aswan, is composed primarily of quartz and feldspar. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, quartz ranks around 7. Copper, the hardest metal widely available to 4th Dynasty Egyptians, ranks around 3. This is not a matter of opinion. A softer material cannot cut a harder one. It can only carry an abrasive that does the work instead. Orthodoxy leans heavily on this principle. Copper tools, we are told, acted as holders for quartz sand, which slowly ground through granite over immense spans of time. In theory, this is possible. In practice, the finished surfaces resist the explanation. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid sits a granite box commonly labeled a sarcophagus. It is massive, rectangular, and undecorated. It is also too large to have been carried through the ascending passage, meaning it was placed during construction. What draws attention is not its size, but its precision. Measurements taken with modern instruments show the interior surfaces are flat to a tolerance approaching that of modern machining. The internal corners meet at near-perfect right angles with minimal rounding. This detail matters. Creating sharp internal corners in granite is one of the most difficult tasks in stoneworking. Percussive methods naturally round corners. Abrasive sawing leaves overcuts, where blades extend beyond edges. Yet the corners inside the granite box are clean, as if material was removed selectively rather than smashed or worn away. The implication is not mystical. It is mechanical. This line of inquiry was pursued rigorously by Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer with decades of experience in aerospace manufacturing. Dunn did not approach Egypt as a historian. He approached it as a machinist. His central question was simple. What tool produces this result? Examining tool marks, surface flatness, and symmetry, he found patterns that aligned poorly with handheld, low-energy tools. The Serapeum at Saqqara deepens the unease. This underground complex contains a series of enormous granite boxes, each weighing between 70 and 100 tons, including their lids. They were supposedly built to house the remains of sacred Apis bulls, yet their scale and precision far exceed any functional necessity for animal burials. The boxes are carved from single blocks of granite and diorite, materials even harder than the granite of the Great Pyramid. Measurements of these boxes reveal surfaces so flat that they adhere under their own weight, creating suction when placed together. In modern engineering, such flatness is achieved using reference surfaces, lapping plates, and controlled environments. Achieving it by rubbing stones together with sand would require the abrasive surface to be flatter than the surface being produced, creating a recursive impossibility. Precision like this is not gradual, it is controlled. Drilling evidence compounds the problem. Throughout Egypt, archaeologists have found cylindrical cores extracted from granite and basalt. These are the remnants of tubular drilling, where a hollow drill cuts a circular path, leaving a core intact. The orthodox explanation again invokes copper tubes and sand. However, the cores preserve spiral striations, microscopic grooves that indicate the rate at which the drill advanced with each rotation. When these striations are measured, the results are startling. The rate of penetration implied by the spacing of the grooves is, in some cases, hundreds of times faster than what modern experimental archaeology can achieve using copper tools and abrasives. Even modern diamond-tipped drills struggle to match the implied feed rates. This is not a marginal discrepancy, it is an order of magnitude problem. Sir Flinders Petrie, the father of scientific Egyptology, noted this anomaly over a century ago. He documented drill cores with spiral grooves that defied explanation but lacked the engineering framework to pursue the implications. Modern engineers, free from allegiance to historical narratives, see the same evidence and arrive at uncomfortable conclusions. Saw marks present another contradiction. Basalt blocks at Giza and in the Valley Temple exhibit long, straight cuts that are remarkably thin and smooth. Some surfaces show signs of vitrification, a glass-like sheen produced by extreme heat. Manual sawing with sand does not generate sufficient temperature or uniformity to create this effect. The cuts resemble those made by large-powered saws or advanced wire-cutting techniques, neither of which belong to the accepted technological inventory of ancient Egypt. Perhaps most perplexing are the so-called scoop marks. In certain quarries and unfinished stones, the surface appears as though material was softened and removed in curved, flowing motions, like ice cream scooped from a block. These marks do not align with hammering, sawing, or abrasion. They suggest a process that altered the stone's structural integrity before removal, possibly through heat, vibration, or an unknown form of energy application. Orthodox responses tend to minimize these observations, attributing them to misinterpretation or exaggeration. Time, patience, and labor are invoked as universal solvents for doubt. Given enough years, it is argued, any result can be achieved. Yet time does not change the physics of materials. It cannot make soft metals behave like hard ones. It cannot produce high-speed drilling without high energy. What emerges is a pattern of technological inconsistency. In Egypt, two distinct modes of stoneworking appear to coexist. One is entirely consistent with known dynastic tools and methods: limestone construction, relief carving, modest granite use with visible tool marks. The other is isolated, extreme, and concentrated at specific sites and periods: ultra-precise granite work, massive monoliths, and machining-like features. The Fourth Dynasty sits at the center of this anomaly. Before it, no such precision appears. After it, it vanishes. Subsequent dynasties built impressive monuments, but none approached the material audacity of Giza or the Serapeum. Technology does not normally regress without cause. Skills may be lost, but entire methods rarely disappear without trace. One explanation is inheritance. The dynastic Egyptians may have encountered structures or techniques developed by an earlier culture and adapted what they could without fully understanding it. They finished, repaired, and repurposed monuments whose core elements were beyond their own technological horizon. This would explain why the most advanced features are embedded deep within structures, while later additions are simpler and more conventional. Stone does not lie, but it does not explain itself. It preserves only the result. Reading that result without prejudice leads to a conclusion that is neither comfortable nor complete. The tools responsible for Egypt's most advanced stonework do not match the tools found in the archaeological record. Something is missing. Whether that missing element is a lost technology, a forgotten culture, or a misinterpretation of evidence remains unresolved. What is clear is that the pyramids are not merely piles of stone shaped by patience alone. They are artifacts of applied force and controlled precision, and their surfaces continue to challenge the boundaries of what we believe ancient hands could achieve. When contradictions accumulate without resolution, interpretation shifts from denial to synthesis. The anomalies of Giza, geological, astronomical, and technological, do not exist in isolation. They cluster, reinforce one another, and form a pattern that resists containment within conventional history. At this stage, the question is no longer whether something unusual occurred on the Giza Plateau, but what kind of system could unify such evidence without breaking under scrutiny. The assumption that frames nearly all discussion of the Great Pyramid is funerary purpose. It is labeled a tomb because later Egyptian kings were buried in pyramids and because Egyptian culture invested deeply in death rituals. Yet the Great Pyramid refuses to behave like a tomb. No mummy has ever been found inside it. No burial goods, no funerary texts, no dedicatory inscriptions. The absence is not partial, it is complete. Looting is often offered as explanation, but looting leaves debris. Even the most violated tombs preserve fragments, disturbed remains, broken lids, or ritual residue. At Giza, there is nothing of the kind. What remains instead is infrastructure: corridors, chambers, shafts, and massive stone components arranged in ways that feel operational rather than ceremonial. The internal layout does not encourage procession or display. Passages are narrow, steep, and deliberately restrictive. Chambers are acoustically resonant. Materials change abruptly at structurally significant points. These decisions make little sense if the goal was burial and veneration, but they make striking sense if the goal was function. This is where the interpretation proposed by engineer Christopher Dunn enters, not as mythology, but as reverse engineering. If the Great Pyramid were a device rather than a monument, what would its components be doing? The idea feels radical only until the architecture is examined without symbolic assumptions. The location itself becomes significant. The Giza Plateau sits above a network of aquifers connected to the Nile, with water flowing beneath porous limestone bedrock. The earth is not inert. It vibrates constantly with low-frequency energy generated by tectonic motion and seismic resonance. These are measurable forces. Dunn proposed that the pyramid was designed not to ignore these forces, but to interact with them. The lowest chamber, cut deep into the bedrock, is often dismissed as unfinished or abandoned. It is rough, asymmetrical, and chaotic compared to the refined granite chambers above. From a ritual perspective, it appears pointless. From an engineering perspective, it appears deliberate. Irregular surfaces induce turbulence. If water from the aquifer were directed into this chamber, pressure changes could produce hydraulic shock, generating pulses of vibrational energy. That energy would travel upward through the structure. Here, material choice becomes decisive. Granite dominates the king's chamber, the grand gallery, and critical structural components. Granite is rich in quartz, a mineral with piezoelectric properties, meaning it generates an electrical charge when mechanically stressed. This principle underlies modern electronics. It is not speculative. A structure weighing millions of tons, built to exact tolerances, constantly subjected to low-frequency vibration, and containing large volumes of piezoelectric material would act as a transducer. Mechanical energy would be converted into electrical potential. The pyramid would not merely rest on the earth, it would couple with it. The Queen's Chamber gains new meaning in this framework. Its shafts do not exit the pyramid. Its walls show evidence of chemical residue. Dunn proposed it functioned as a reaction chamber. Ancient Egyptians possessed advanced chemical knowledge, including acids and salts. Introducing specific compounds through the shafts could generate hydrogen gas through controlled reactions. Hydrogen is highly resonant and amplifies vibrational energy. Filling the internal passages with hydrogen would tune the pyramid, much like adjusting the resonance of a musical instrument. This is not mysticism. Resonance is governed by geometry, material, and frequency. The Grand Gallery appears engineered to channel energy upward. Its steep incline, corbelled walls, and stepped geometry create standing wave conditions. Energy is directed towards the king's chamber, which becomes the focal node of the system. Built entirely of polished granite and structurally isolated by massive relieving beams, it is both acoustically and mechanically distinct. At the center of this chamber sits the granite box. As a sarcophagus, it is anomalous, undecorated, broken, empty. As a resonator, it is logical. Its dimensions allow it to vibrate at specific frequencies. Excited by acoustic and mechanical energy, it would act as a harmonic stabilizer, intensifying the system's output. The original casing stones add another layer. Tura limestone is an excellent insulator. Polished to a mirror finish, it would reflect energy inward rather than allow dissipation. The pyramid becomes a sealed system. Energy generated inside has only one exit point, the apex. The capstone is missing. Ancient descriptions suggest it was brilliant, possibly metallic. If constructed from a conductive material, it would serve as a terminal. Energy accumulated within the pyramid could discharge upward, ionizing the air and producing electromagnetic effects. Under this model, the Great Pyramid was not a power plant in the modern sense, but an energy conversion system. It harvested ambient forces, water pressure, seismic vibration, chemical reaction, and transformed them into usable energy. This energy could explain the advanced stoneworking evidence seen at Giza and related sites. The clustering of high-precision stonework around Giza becomes intelligible. If energy transmission was limited by range, tools would be most effective near the source. When the system failed or was shut down, the technology vanished, leaving monuments that could no longer be replicated. This interpretation also explains regression. Later dynasties built impressive structures but never matched the material audacity of Giza. Technology does not usually disappear without cause. Infrastructure does. The theory is extreme, but it is internally coherent. It accounts for architectural design, material selection, precision, and technological discontinuity without requiring special pleading. It reframes the Great Pyramid not as a tomb, but as infrastructure later absorbed into religion. Stone does not generate speculation. It restricts it. When explanations align with physical evidence rather than reinterpret it away, new possibilities emerge. The Great Pyramid does not ask for belief. It demands accounting. At a certain depth of inquiry, the pyramid stops behaving like an object and begins behaving like an environment. Its architecture does not merely contain space, it conditions experience. Sound behaves differently inside it. Light disappears completely. Temperature stabilizes. Time itself seems to slow, not metaphorically, but physiologically, as sensory input collapses. If the Great Pyramid functioned as a machine, its most sensitive component may not have been stone or energy, but the human body placed within it. The assumption that the granite box in the king's chamber was meant to hold a corpse has never been supported by evidence. It contains no inscriptions, no ritual carvings, no lid designed for sealing. It is oversized, bare, and acoustically active. Granite, dense with quartz, resonates under vibration. When struck or stimulated, it rings with a low, sustained tone. In a chamber built entirely of the same material, resonance does not dissipate. It accumulates. The king's chamber is not proportioned like a burial chamber. Its dimensions correspond closely to harmonic ratios used in acoustics. Modern tests have shown that sounds produced inside it are amplified and sustained, particularly in low-frequency ranges. The chamber behaves like a resonant cavity, not a shrine. When external noise is removed, even subtle vibrations become dominant. The Earth itself produces constant low-frequency oscillations, known today as Schumann resonances, generated by lightning activity and ionospheric interaction. These frequencies overlap with ranges known to influence human brainwave states. The human brain operates electrically. Neural activity is rhythmic, cycling through measurable frequencies associated with different states of consciousness. Theta waves correlate with deep meditation and hypnagogic imagery. Delta waves appear in dreamless sleep. External electromagnetic and acoustic environments can entrain these rhythms, nudging the brain into altered states without chemicals or trauma. This is established neuroscience, not speculation. Inside the pyramid, isolation is absolute. No light penetrates. Sound is dampened except for internal resonance. The narrow passages leading to the king's chamber require the body to bend, crouch, and compress itself, inducing mild physical stress. Upon entering the chamber, the body transitions abruptly from confinement to open space. This contrast alone is disorienting. When combined with fasting, ritual preparation, and extended darkness, the brain begins to detach from external reference points. Ancient cultures understood this effect intuitively. Across the world, initiation rites involve caves, darkness, silence, and isolation. These are not symbolic gestures. They are neurological triggers. The Great Pyramid magnifies these triggers through scale, material, and precision. It does not merely simulate a cave. it engineers one. If the pyramid was originally designed to interact with terrestrial energy, as suggested by its material composition and placement, then the king's chamber would sit at the convergence point of mechanical vibration, acoustic resonance, and electromagnetic fluctuation. A human body placed at that point would be subjected to conditions unlike any natural environment, not harmful, but transformative. This reframes Egyptian theology. The so-called Book of the Dead was not a funerary text in the modern sense. Its original name translates to the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It is not about decay, but transition. It describes a journey through darkness, confrontation with fear, passage through gates, and emergence into light reborn. For centuries, this was read as metaphor. It may have been instruction. The Duat, the Egyptian underworld, is not described as a place of punishment. It is a liminal zone, a testing ground where the soul is stripped, weighed, and refined. Monsters, guardians, and trials populate it, but these are not external enemies. They are manifestations of internal chaos. Modern psychology recognizes similar imagery in deep altered states, where suppressed fears and archetypal symbols surface with overwhelming intensity. In this context, the pyramid becomes an initiatory device. The granite box is not a coffin, but a cradle. The initiate enters alive, prepared through ritual, fasting, and training. The chamber is sealed. Darkness and silence take hold. Over hours or days, sensory deprivation alters perception. The resonant environment entrains brainwaves. The sense of self dissolves. What follows is not symbolic death, but neurological death, the collapse of ego boundaries. Emerging from such an experience fundamentally alters cognition. Fear of death diminishes because death has been simulated. Identity shifts because the mind has experienced its own dissolution and return. The initiate does not merely believe in transformation. They have undergone it. This is initiation in its literal sense, a controlled near-death experience engineered through architecture. This interpretation aligns with a critical detail. The pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty contain no bodies. Kings were not buried in them because they were not meant for burial. They were used in life, not death. Once initiation was complete, the structure no longer served the individual. It was not personalized. It was functional. Later dynasties abandoned this model. Smaller pyramids appear, followed by rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The architecture shifts from experiential to symbolic. Ritual replaces mechanism. Text replaces environment. This is not progression. It is substitution. Something was lost. If the Great Pyramid was inherited from an earlier civilization, its original function may have been partially understood, partially mythologized, and eventually ritualized beyond repair. The dynastic Egyptians preserved the shell, honored its power, but could not replicate its effect. Initiation became ceremonial. Theology became narrative. The machine fell silent. This silence may explain why no inscriptions deface the king's chamber. Writing would interfere with resonance. Reliefs would disrupt acoustic symmetry. A chamber designed to influence consciousness must remain geometrically pure. Decoration would be contamination. Across cultures, those who undergo initiatory death return as intermediaries. Shamans, kings, priesthoods derive authority not from inheritance alone, but from having crossed a threshold others have not. The Egyptian pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was a god in life. Such a claim demands proof, not proclamation. The pyramid may have been that proof. Seen this way, Giza is not a cemetery, but a threshold site, a place where the boundary between human and divine was engineered, not imagined. Stone, sound, darkness, and planetary energy converge to alter consciousness in a repeatable, controlled way. This is not religion opposed to science. It is science expressed through religion. Whether this system was designed for one initiate at a time, or as part of a larger network, remains unknown. What is clear is that the pyramid's architecture aligns far more naturally with transformation than with burial. It is a machine whose output was not energy alone, but altered human awareness. If that awareness was the true objective, the question of who built the pyramid becomes secondary to why. A civilization that understood consciousness as a navigable state rather than a mystery would encode that understanding into stone, not text. Stone does not argue, it endures. The Great Pyramid remains sealed in purpose, but not in effect. It continues to condition those who enter it, not through belief, but through physics. In silence, it still does what it was built to do. When the pyramid is understood as an initiatory environment rather than a monument, its isolation becomes meaningful. Giza does not sit amid dense habitation. It rises apart, elevated above the Nile floodplain, separated from daily life. This separation mirrors the psychological separation demanded by initiation itself. One does not stumble into transformation. One is removed from the ordinary world and placed somewhere deliberately other. Yet Giza is not alone. Across the ancient world, sites appear that echo the same architectural priorities: massive stone blocks, extreme precision, acoustic sensitivity, and strategic placement over geologically active ground. These are not cultural coincidences. They are technological fingerprints. The builders may have spoken different languages or worn different symbols, but they understood the same principles. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, dated to at least 9,600 BCE, enormous T-shaped stone pillars were erected by hunter-gatherer societies long before agriculture was supposed to exist. The stones are arranged in circles, carved with animal symbols, and anchored directly into bedrock. There is no evidence of domestic life, no hearths, no homes, only ritual architecture on a monumental scale. This reverses the standard narrative. Civilization did not begin with farming and then produce ritual. Ritual came first. In Malta, temples like Hagar Chim and Mnajdra are built with megaliths weighing dozens of tons, aligned precisely with solstices and equinoxes. Their chambers are acoustically tuned. A human voice inside them resonates unnaturally, amplified and distorted in ways that affect the nervous system. These structures were not built for shelter. They were built to induce experience. In Peru, sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo use polygonal stone blocks fitted so tightly that no blade can enter the joints. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons. The stone surfaces show signs of softening rather than fracturing, similar to scoop marks seen in Egypt. These cultures had no iron tools, no wheels, no draft animals capable of hauling such masses. Yet the work exists, precise and defiant. At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 limestone blocks known as the Trilithon weigh over 800 tons each. They sit in a temple platform built long before Roman occupation, though Romans later incorporated the site into their architecture. Like Giza, the most massive elements are the oldest, buried deepest, and surrounded by later construction that never again approaches their scale. The pattern repeats. The oldest layers are the most technically extreme. Later cultures inherit, reuse, and mythologize what they cannot reproduce. This is not how technological progress normally unfolds. It suggests loss, not advancement. Geology reinforces the connection. Many of these sites are located near fault lines, underground water systems, or areas of heightened seismic activity. Modern research has shown that such locations emit natural electromagnetic fields and low-frequency vibrations. These fields can influence human perception and physiology, particularly in enclosed stone environments. Ancient builders did not need equations to notice this. They needed only observation. Stone amplifies vibration. Water conducts energy. Geometry focuses resonance. These are not cultural traits. They are physical laws. A civilization that understood them could build environments that reliably altered consciousness. Over time, those environments would be mythologized as sacred, their function encoded as story rather than instruction. This reframes the idea of a lost civilization. It need not have been global in political terms. It may have been global in knowledge. A network of sites, each tuned to local conditions, each serving as a node in a system of initiation, energy manipulation, or both. The builders may not have ruled empires. They may have curated thresholds. When cataclysm struck at the end of the last ice age, such a culture would be uniquely vulnerable. Rising seas would erase coastal settlements. Flooding would destroy infrastructure. Survivors would scatter, carrying fragments of knowledge into new cultures that lacked the context to sustain it. What remained were the stone machines, too large to destroy, too complex to rebuild. Myth would follow. Gods descending from the sky. Teacher figures emerging after a flood. Golden ages lost to catastrophe. These stories appear independently across continents. They are dismissed as fantasy because they do not fit linear history. Yet they fit disruption perfectly. In Egypt, figures like Thoth appear not as inventors but as restorers, bringers of knowledge after chaos. He does not create civilization from nothing. He reorders it. This distinction matters. It implies inheritance, not genesis. The pyramids themselves reflect this layering. Advanced features are buried within. Simpler additions sit outside. Casing stones, causeways, and temples reflect dynastic workmanship. Core elements reflect something older. The same pattern appears elsewhere. At Ollantaytambo, finely cut megaliths form foundations, topped by rougher Inca stonework. At Baalbek, Roman columns rise from an inexplicable base. This is not insult to later cultures. It is acknowledgement of adaptation. They worked with what they found. They honored it. They used it. They told stories about it. Over generations, function blurred into reverence. If the Great Pyramid was once part of a larger system, its silence today may be intentional. A machine designed to alter consciousness or harness planetary energy would not be safe in untrained hands. Shutting it down would be an act of preservation, not abandonment. The removal of the capstone, the sealing of passages, the gradual loss of operational knowledge could all be safeguards. What remains is a fossilized interface, an object that still conditions experience but no longer completes its circuit. Visitors report altered perception, emotional intensity, and time distortion inside the pyramid even now, stripped of its casing and possibly its power source. The machine is broken, but not inert. This perspective dissolves the false conflict between science and myth. Myth becomes degraded memory. Science becomes rediscovered principle. The ancient world was not irrational. It was observational. It encoded its highest knowledge into forms that could survive disaster, even if their meaning could not. The Great Pyramid doesn't stand as a challenge to modern intelligence. It stands as a reminder that intelligence has existed before, reached heights, and fallen away. History is not a straight ascent. It is a series of peaks, some buried, some exposed. To accept this is not to reject Egyptology, geology, or astronomy. It is to allow them to speak together instead of in isolation. When they do, a different story emerges, not of primitive beginnings, but of repeated forgetting. Stone endures. Knowledge does not, unless it is built into stone. As the idea of inheritance replaces invention, the timeline of Egypt stretches backward and thins. The dynastic record, so rich in names, rituals, and monuments, begins abruptly, already mature, already sophisticated. Writing appears fully formed. Religious cosmology arrives complete, not tentative. Architecture does not stumble through crude phases, but enters history with confidence. This suddenness has long been treated as coincidence or rapid innovation. Seen through the lens of loss, it reads differently. The first dynasty does not describe a people discovering civilization. It describes a people restoring order. The earliest kings do not portray themselves as inventors, but as maintainers of Maat, the cosmic balance. Maat was not progress, it was alignment. To restore Maat was to realign the world after disruption. This language matters. It implies something was already there and had been damaged. Egyptian king lists reinforce this. Before human kings, they speak of divine rulers, followed by the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, semi-mythical beings who ruled for vast spans of time before recorded history. These reigns are dismissed as symbolic exaggeration, yet they function like placeholders for a forgotten epoch. They occupy the space where memory fades, but significance remains. If a pre-dynastic culture existed, advanced enough to construct Giza's core features, it would not resemble later empires. It would not leave behind cities recognizable to archaeology. Cataclysm does not erase equally. Coastal settlements vanish first. Organic materials decay. Only stone survives. And stone survives selectively. Only what is massive, anchored, and intentionally overbuilt. This explains the strange selectivity of the archaeological record. We find no tools capable of the precision seen in granite, yet we find the granite itself. We find no settlements matching the scale of Giza, yet we find the complex intact. This is not absence of evidence. It is evidence of survival bias. What remains is what was built to outlast disaster. The end of the last ice age was not gentle. Sea levels rose over 100 meters. Entire coastlines disappeared. Rivers changed course. Climate zones shifted violently. Human populations fragmented. Knowledge systems dependent on continuity would collapse. Survivors would not rebuild complexity immediately. They would preserve fragments through ritual, myth, and hierarchy. In this context, the Egyptian priesthood becomes a repository rather than a source. Priests did not create cosmology, they curated it. Sacred geometry, astronomical alignments, and ritual texts were guarded, not experimented with. Innovation was dangerous. Stability was sacred. This conservatism preserved echoes of earlier understanding long after its practical application was gone. The pyramids themselves reflect this shift. The earliest are the largest and most precise. Later, pyramids shrink, simplify, and eventually fail structurally. Stone quality declines. Core blocks become rubble-filled. Alignment degrades. This is not a learning curve ascending, it is a decay curve descending. The farther Egypt moves from its mysterious starting point, the less capable it becomes of repeating it. This pattern appears elsewhere. At Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, massive stone blocks are fitted with precision unmatched by later Andean cultures. At Angkor, early core temples are more technically ambitious than later additions. At Easter Island, the earliest moai are the largest, later ones smaller and cruder. These are not isolated failures. They are echoes of the same trajectory. If the original builders of Giza understood Earth as an energetic system and consciousness as something that could be tuned, their priorities would differ radically from ours. They would not prioritize expansion, conquest, or accumulation. They would prioritize placement, alignment, and durability. They would build few structures, but they would build them to last. This may explain why Giza feels singular. It was not part of a city because it was not meant to be inhabited. It was a node, a focal point, a place where specific conditions converged. Later, Egyptians built cities along the Nile, close to water and trade. Giza remained aloof, ceremonial, set apart. Over time, meaning ossified. The function of initiation became mythologized as resurrection after death. The energetic system became theology. The machine became a monument. By the time of the New Kingdom, the pyramids were already ancient, already revered, already misunderstood. Pharaohs chose to be buried elsewhere, yet continued to honor Giza as sacred ground. This transition from function to symbol is not failure, it is adaptation. Cultures that survive catastrophe do so by simplifying. They trade precision for story. Story travels when machines cannot. The Egyptian obsession with the afterlife may itself be a memory of initiation misremembered as metaphysics. The Great Pyramid's emptiness becomes meaningful again. It was not robbed. It was vacated. Once its function ceased, nothing belonged inside it. It was not a container, but a process. When the process ended, the container remained. This reframing also explains why attempts to replicate the pyramid's power fail today. Even if the theory of energy or consciousness manipulation is correct, too many variables are missing. The casing stones are gone. The capstone is missing. The aquifer levels have changed. Earth's electromagnetic environment is different. Precession has altered alignment. The system is incomplete. What remains is a shell that still hints at its former role. Visitors report sensations not because of belief, but because geometry and material still affect perception. The pyramid no longer performs its full function, but it still resonates faintly, like an instrument out of tune yet recognizable. This is why the question of authorship matters less than the question of intent. Whether built by Egyptians or inherited by them, the pyramid embodies a worldview in which humanity is not separate from earth or sky. It encodes participation, not domination. Alignment, not extraction. Modern civilization measures success by speed and expansion. Ancient monumental architecture measures success by endurance and precision. These values are not compatible. One builds for centuries, the other builds for millennia. If a civilization before Egypt reached a level of understanding that prioritized harmony with planetary systems, its disappearance would not be surprising. Such a civilization would be fragile in the face of abrupt climate change. Its survival strategy would not be militaristic. It would be archival. It would leave behind messages in stone. Giza may be one such message, not a warning written in words, but a demonstration written in geometry, a reminder that knowledge can be lost, that progress is not guaranteed, and that intelligence has risen before only to be erased by forces beyond control. The plateau remains, the stone remains, the alignment remains. What is gone is the context that made it intelligible. History did not begin at Giza. It resurfaced there. When a structure survives long enough, it stops belonging to its builders and begins belonging to interpretation. Giza crossed that threshold thousands of years ago. Priests, kings, conquerors, scholars, and tourists have each layered meaning onto it, but beneath every narrative overlay, the physical reality remains unchanged. Stone does not adapt to belief. It preserves only what was done to it and how it responds. Modern science arrived late to Giza and arrived cautiously. For most of history, investigation meant excavation, and excavation meant destruction. Only in recent decades have non-invasive technologies allowed researchers to look inside the pyramid without dismantling it. Methods such as muon tomography, which tracks cosmic particles passing through stone to reveal internal density, have exposed previously unknown cavities deep within the structure. These discoveries are often framed as curiosities, but their implications are structural, not incidental. One such feature is the large void discovered above the Grand Gallery. It stretches for dozens of meters, yet serves no clearly identified structural purpose. It is not a known relieving chamber. It is not decorative. Its presence implies that the pyramid was not built as a solid mass later hollowed out, but as a volumetric system planned from the beginning. Space was as intentional as stone. Planning at this level demands modeling. Someone understood load paths, internal stress distribution, and balance long before these concepts had modern names. The pyramid does not survive because it is massive. It survives because its forces resolve rather than accumulate. Weight is redirected, not resisted. This is why earthquakes have failed where time itself has not. Acoustic testing inside the pyramid reinforces this coherence. Specific frequencies introduced into certain chambers produce resonance patterns that travel through stone rather than air. Some spaces amplify sound dramatically, while others dampen it almost completely. These effects are repeatable and independent of expectation. Geometry and material dictate behavior, not interpretation. Electromagnetic experiments add another layer. When exposed to radio frequencies, the Great Pyramid concentrates energy in particular internal zones, especially the King's Chamber. This behavior has been demonstrated through simulation and scaled physical models. The pyramid does not merely absorb energy, it organizes it. That organization follows predictable physical laws. None of this proves intent on its own. Natural formations can produce strange effects, but coincidence becomes unlikely when multiple independent systems, acoustic, electromagnetic, structural, converge on the same focal points. The pyramid behaves less like a passive monument and more like a device optimized across domains. Resistance to this conclusion is cultural, not evidential. Machines belong, in our minds, to modernity. Ancient cultures are expected to produce art, ritual, and myth, not functional systems of such sophistication. This expectation filters interpretation before evidence is examined. Anything that feels technologically anachronistic is dismissed by instinct rather than analysis. Physics does not respect chronology. Quartz generates electrical charge under stress regardless of era. Stone resonates regardless of belief. Geometry focuses energy whether or not the builders named the principle. The pyramid responds only to how it was built, not to when. This forces a reassessment of ancient knowledge. It may not have been theoretical or documented. It may have been empirical, transmitted through practice rather than writing. A culture can understand resonance without formal acoustics, electricity without circuits, alignment without trigonometry. Such knowledge leaves products, not manuals. Knowledge transmitted this way is fragile. It depends on uninterrupted tradition. When catastrophe disrupts continuity, technique vanishes even if artifacts remain. Later cultures inherit results without process. They replicate form but lose function. Meaning becomes symbolic because mechanism is no longer accessible. This pattern appears clearly in Egyptian architecture. Later pyramids mimic the silhouette of Giza, but not its performance. Internal layouts simplify. Material quality declines. Alignment accuracy degrades. The appearance remains recognizable, but the inner logic is gone. This is not incompetence. It is amnesia. The priesthood responded by preserving meaning through narrative. Myths of Osiris torn apart and reassembled echo processes of disintegration and reintegration. Journeys through the Duat mirror, experiences of sensory deprivation and altered consciousness. These stories function as compressed memory, preserving experience when operational knowledge is lost. Modern observers often treat myth as metaphor layered onto superstition. Yet metaphor is what remains when technical language disappears. Myths are not inventions. They are residual data expressed emotionally rather than mechanically. Giza occupies a rare intersection where memory and matter overlap. The artifact still encodes behavior even if its operators are gone. Modern science approaches it cautiously, constrained by institutional risk and interpretive inertia. Yet caution can become avoidance. The pyramid has endured earthquakes, floods, quarrying, tunneling, and centuries of intrusion. Still, its internal behavior persists. It resonates, it aligns, it concentrates energy. What we see today is not the original system, but a degraded remnant. Key components are missing. The casing stones that once insulated the structure are gone. The capstone that may have served as a terminal has vanished. The water table has shifted. Earth's electromagnetic environment has changed. Precession has altered celestial alignment. The system is incomplete, yet still responsive. This explains modern hesitation. Restoring the pyramid would not be an aesthetic act. It would be an experiment. Reactivating a system whose full behavior is unknown carries risk. Leaving it dormant is safer than understanding it incorrectly. So Giza remains suspended between monument and mechanism, studied but not tested, measured but not restored, revered but not completed. The central issue is no longer whether ancient people could build the pyramid. The structure itself answers that. The issue is what they believed they were doing. Whether they were honoring death or engineering transformation. Whether gods were worshipped or manufactured through experience. Stone offers no explanations. It offers behavior. And the behavior of the Great Pyramid continues to suggest intention deeper than burial, purpose deeper than display. Time has not erased that intention. It has only muted it. Enough remains to destabilize certainty and force a more difficult possibility. That ancient knowledge was not primitive, only unfamiliar, and that its disappearance was not slow, but sudden. Giza does not stand as a relic of ignorance. It stands as a survivor of forgetting. As the narrative stretches backward beyond dynasties and names, resistance hardens. Not because the evidence weakens, but because the implications destabilize something deeper than history. Accepting that Giza may not be a product of linear progress forces a confrontation with a modern assumption that civilization only moves forward. The pyramid does not merely challenge dates, it challenges direction. Modern society measures advancement by accumulation, more tools, faster machines, broader control. Ancient monumental architecture suggests a different metric: precision over speed, permanence over expansion, alignment over domination. The Great Pyramid does not display wealth, it displays restraint. Every feature appears optimized, not excessive. Nothing is ornamental without purpose. This economy of intent feels alien to a culture that equates scale with power. If a pre-dynastic civilization existed, it may not have resembled an empire. Empires require bureaucracy, extraction, and force. None of those leave subtle traces. Giza is subtle in execution despite its size. Its complexity is internal. Its power is quiet. This suggests a culture more interested in calibration than conquest. Calibration implies understanding limits. A society that builds with stone rather than metal, with geometry rather than engines, may be intentionally choosing stability over growth. Stone does not rust. Geometry does not become obsolete. A structure aligned to earth and sky remains relevant regardless of technological fashion. This is not primitive thinking. It is long thinking. This perspective reframes the absence of artifacts. We expect tools because we expect industry. But what if the tools were temporary and the outcome was permanent? A culture focused on creating environments rather than products would leave few portable remains. Knowledge would reside in technique, not objects. Once technique is lost, nothing remains but the result. The Great Pyramid may represent the apex of such a philosophy, not the peak of power, but the peak of alignment. It does not force the environment to obey. It listens to it. It sits where water flows underground, where bedrock resonates, where the sky can be measured with clarity. It integrates rather than imposes. This integration explains why later cultures could not replicate it. Once alignment is lost, imitation fails. You can copy form, but not function. Without understanding the environmental context, the same shape becomes inert. This is why later pyramids resemble shells. They look similar but behave differently. The obsession with death in later Egyptian religion may itself be a distortion. Initiation becomes burial. Transformation becomes judgment. Experience becomes doctrine. What was once enacted becomes narrated. This is not deception. It is degradation through time. The pyramid's silence amplifies this. It offers no inscriptions to guide interpretation, no texts to anchor meaning. This forces each era to project its own understanding onto it. In doing so, the structure acts as a mirror. It reflects the assumptions of those who study it. To a religious culture, it becomes a tomb. To a nationalist culture, it becomes a symbol of identity. To a tourist culture, it becomes a destination. To an engineering culture, it becomes a problem. Each interpretation reveals more about the interpreter than the stone. Modern academia struggles here because its methods are segmented. Archaeology studies artifacts, geology studies erosion, astronomy studies alignment, engineering studies structure. Consciousness is left to psychology. The pyramid refuses this division. It operates across domains. Studying it in fragments obscures its coherence. When domains are reunited, discomfort arises. The idea that ancient people may have understood consciousness as something to be engineered rather than worshipped threatens both scientific and religious narratives. It suggests a worldview where mind and matter are not separate categories. Such a worldview would not prioritize writing. Writing freezes knowledge. Experience transmits it. Initiation cannot be read. It must be undergone. A culture built on this principle would leave few records but powerful sites. This may explain why Giza feels out of place even within Egypt. It does not behave like later temples. It does not tell stories on its walls. It does not guide visitors with reliefs or inscriptions. It remains mute. This muteness is not neglect. It is design. Silence is necessary for resonance. Inscription would disrupt it. Decoration would fracture it. Purity of form preserves function. The pyramid's austerity is not aesthetic minimalism. It is operational necessity. Over time, as function faded, reverence filled the gap. People sensed power without understanding source. Sacredness replaced utility. Prohibition replaced access. What could not be used was worshipped. This process repeats across cultures. Stone circles become shrines. Caves become temples. Sites of altered consciousness become holy places. The original purpose dissolves, but the effect lingers faintly, enough to inspire awe. Giza may be the most extreme example of this transition. A place once used became a place only viewed. A device became a relic. The shift is irreversible once knowledge is lost. Modern efforts to demystify the pyramid often fall into a trap. By insisting it must fit within known historical frameworks, they strip it of its anomalous features. By insisting it must be supernatural, they abandon physical evidence. Both extremes fail because the pyramid occupies a third category, engineered experience. If this is accepted, the question of builders becomes secondary. Whether Egyptian or pre-Egyptian, what matters is what they understood. They understood that environment shapes consciousness, that stone and sound can alter perception, that alignment with earth and sky produces effects no text can replicate. This understanding has not vanished completely. Modern science is rediscovering it piecemeal through neuroscience, acoustics, and electromagnetic research. Meditation chambers, sensory deprivation tanks, and resonance therapy eco-principles embedded in ancient stone. The difference is scale. Modern experiments are isolated. Giza was comprehensive. It unified environment, body, and planet into a single system. That ambition feels foreign because modern civilization does not think in millennia. The pyramid does not argue for a lost golden age. It argues for a lost orientation, a way of engaging reality that valued harmony over acceleration. Its survival is not proof of superiority, but of durability. If civilization once reached such an orientation and lost it, the lesson is not nostalgia. It is caution. Progress without alignment leads to fragility. Knowledge without integration leads to collapse. Giza remains because it was built to remain, not as a monument to ego, but as an anchor. Whether we understand it or not, it continues to stand in quiet defiance of linear history. reminding those who approach it that advancement is not guaranteed, and forgetting is always closer than we think. As the pyramid's purpose shifts from burial to transformation, the figure of the pharaoh changes with it. He is no longer merely a ruler destined for divine status after death. He becomes a participant in a process that confers authority through experience rather than inheritance. Kingship, in this light, is not symbolic. It is physiological. In early Egypt, the pharaoh was described as a god in human form, not metaphorically but functionally. He was Horus on earth, Osiris in the afterlife. This dual identity has long been interpreted as religious abstraction, yet abstraction alone cannot sustain political authority across millennia. Something more tangible was required. The pyramid may have provided it. Initiation confers legitimacy in a way lineage cannot. A ruler who has undergone controlled ego dissolution, who has experienced death and return within a resonant environment, emerges altered. Such a person does not rule by decree alone. He rules by presence. His authority is felt, not argued. Ancient societies understood this intuitively. The king was not simply appointed, he was transformed. This reframes the early Egyptian state. Power was not enforced solely through armies or laws. It was embodied. The pharaoh's composure, detachment, and perceived divinity were not performances. They were consequences. A man who has faced the collapse of identity and survived does not govern from fear. He governs from certainty. This may explain the extraordinary stability of early Egyptian civilization. For nearly 3,000 years, its core symbols, language, and cosmology remained intact. Dynasties rose and fell, but the underlying worldview persisted. Such continuity is rare. It suggests not dogma, but a repeating experiential anchor. The pyramid initiation would not have been common. It would have been reserved. Not every king may have undergone it, but the mythos surrounding it would persist regardless. Over time, as access diminished or knowledge faded, the initiation became legend. Legend hardened into theology. Theology became tradition. The later emphasis on mummification and elaborate tombs may reflect this loss. When transformation can no longer be enacted in life, it is deferred to death. Ritual replaces experience. Preservation replaces initiation. The body is prepared obsessively because the soul no longer knows the path. This also explains why later Egyptians shifted burial practices away from pyramids. The Valley of the Kings offered secrecy and security, but not transformation. The pyramid remained symbolically potent, but functionally inert. It was no longer a gateway, it was a memory. The figure of Osiris embodies this transition. Originally associated with renewal and regeneration, he becomes ruler of the dead. His dismemberment and reassembly echo initiation, but the act is displaced into mythic time. Humans no longer undergo the process. They hear about it. In this context, the pyramid texts take on new meaning. The earliest funerary texts do not instruct the dead how to reach the afterlife. They describe a journey already known. They assume familiarity. They read less like manuals and more like confirmations. The initiate has been there before. As centuries pass, the texts grow longer, more elaborate, more prescriptive. The Book of the Dead emerges, filled with spells, names, and safeguards. Complexity increases as certainty fades. What was once embodied must now be memorized. This pattern mirrors psychological decay. When direct experience is lost, belief proliferates, rules multiply, fear increases. The calm confidence of early dynastic art gives way to anxious repetition. The afterlife becomes something to be negotiated rather than known. The Great Pyramid stands at the cusp of this transition. It is both the culmination of an older system and the beginning of its mythologization. Its emptiness is not an oversight. It is evidence. It was not meant to house a body because the body was not meant to stay. This emptiness unsettles modern expectations because it refuses closure. There is no corpse to confirm function, no inscription to resolve ambiguity. The structure remains ambiguous by design. It cannot be reduced to a single explanation without losing coherence. The pharaoh who emerged from initiation would not speak of it openly. Sacred knowledge is not broadcast. It is guarded, not out of elitism, but necessity. An unprepared mind encountering ego dissolution can fracture. Initiation requires discipline, context, and guidance. As generations passed and the original context eroded, access would have been restricted further. Eventually, it would cease altogether. The machine would remain, but the key would be gone. This process mirrors what happens when advanced technologies outlive their cultures. We see remnants of ancient metallurgy whose techniques are lost. We see architectural feats whose methods cannot be replicated. Knowledge is not cumulative by default. It must be maintained. The Great Pyramid may represent the last intact artifact of a system that understood leadership as an altered state. A ruler was not elevated because he commanded because he had crossed a threshold others had not. Modern leadership has no such requirement. Authority is procedural. Transformation is optional. The result is instability. Power without internal calibration leads to excess. This is not nostalgia. It is observation. Societies that bind authority to transformation produce leaders who are restrained by experience. Societies that bind authority to position produce leaders constrained only by structure. If this interpretation holds, the pyramid is not a relic of superstition. It is a relic of governance rooted in psychology. It suggests that ancient civilizations may have understood something modern systems ignore, that consciousness is infrastructure. The collapse of such a system would not be marked by war alone. It would be marked by forgetting how to make leaders. Dynasties would continue, but depth would erode. Ceremony would replace initiation. Symbols would replace process. The Great Pyramid stands at the beginning of recorded Egyptian history, not because it was first, but because it was last. The last fully functional expression of a worldview that treated human consciousness as something to be engineered, tested, and refined. Everything that followed was commentary. Stone cannot transmit practice. It can only preserve possibility. The pyramid preserves the outline of a path once walked. The path itself is gone. Yet the outline remains, challenging assumptions about power, leadership, and the nature of ancient knowledge. It suggests that the deepest technologies of the past were not machines alone, but methods for shaping the human mind. And in that sense, the Great Pyramid may be less an artifact of ancient Egypt than a mirror held up to modern civilization, asking whether progress without transformation is progress at all. When initiation disappears, memory fragments. What remains are symbols detached from function, rituals severed from outcome, and architecture revered without comprehension. This fragmentation does not announce itself as loss. It disguises itself as tradition. Egypt perfected this disguise. By the time history begins to speak clearly through texts, the most consequential knowledge had already slipped beyond reach. The later Egyptian world was not unaware of this absence. It was haunted by it. Texts repeatedly reference a distant era called Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked the earth and order was established directly rather than inherited. This was not treated as a metaphorical past. It was described as a real epoch, fundamentally different from the present condition. Everything afterward was maintenance, repetition, or decline. In Zep Tepi, knowledge was whole. After it, knowledge was partitioned. Priests guarded fragments. Kings reenacted ceremonies whose original effects they could no longer produce. Architecture repeated sacred forms without reproducing their original function. The Great Pyramid stood as a silent remnant of this rupture, already ancient even to those who revered it. This helps explain Egypt's obsession with preservation. Bodies were embalmed to resist decay. Names were carved to resist erasure. Monuments were aligned to stars that outlasted generations. A civilization preoccupied with loss behaves this way. Preservation becomes a survival instinct when renewal is no longer possible. The intense focus on the afterlife may reflect not confidence, but anxiety. When transformation can no longer be enacted in life, it is postponed to death. Consciousness becomes something to be judged rather than refined. The elaborate bureaucracy of the afterlife, judges, scales, spells, and passwords, reads like an attempt to regulate something once directly experienced. This bureaucratization mirrors technological regression. When a process is no longer understood, rules multiply around it. Procedure replaces insight. The Book of the Dead expands because certainty has eroded. Spells proliferate because memory has faded. The soul must now navigate by instruction rather than recognition. The pyramid texts carved into later pyramids mark this shift clearly. They appear centuries after Giza, and their tone is explanatory and prescriptive. They tell the dead what to say, where to go, whom to name. The Great Pyramid says nothing. It does not instruct because it once required no instruction. Experience itself was the knowledge. This contrast is crucial. Giza does not comfort. It confronts. It offers no reassurance because reassurance was unnecessary. Once that experience vanished, language rushed in to compensate. Text filled the vacuum left by silence. This pattern echoes through later mystery traditions. Greek initiatory rites, the Eleusinian mysteries, and Orphic teachings all point back to Egypt as a source, yet none replicate its scale or certainty. They are adaptations formed within cultures already living in the aftermath of loss. As knowledge dispersed geographically, it also fragmented conceptually. What was once unified, astronomy, architecture, psychology, geology, split into separate domains. Integration gave way to specialization. Capability narrowed as definition sharpened. The Great Pyramid resists specialization. It cannot be fully explained through archaeology alone, or engineering alone, or theology alone. Each lens captures only a fragment. Understanding requires synthesis, precisely what modern systems struggle to sustain. This resistance generates discomfort. The pyramid exposes the limits of compartmentalized thinking. It suggests that ancient cultures may have achieved coherence where modern ones achieve complexity. Not less intelligence, but differently applied intelligence. The disappearance of that coherence may not have been accidental. A civilization capable of engineering consciousness would understand its dangers. Such power, misused, could destabilize society, restricting access, ritualizing process, and eventually sealing the system may have been deliberate acts of containment rather than collapse. The loss of the pyramid's casing stones, the absence of its capstone, and the sealing of its passages may represent deactivation rather than destruction. A structure designed for initiation would not be left operational indefinitely. Over time, deactivation would be indistinguishable from ruin. Practical measures would harden into taboos. Engineering would ossify into religion. Function would be remembered only as sanctity. This transition is visible in later Egyptian prohibitions. Certain chambers became forbidden. Certain knowledge became restricted. Authority was preserved through lineage rather than experience. This is not the preservation of wisdom. It is the preservation of power. Power divorced from experience is brittle. It relies on repetition and enforcement rather than transformation. Egyptian civilization endured for millennia, but when it collapsed, it did so rapidly. Foreign rule succeeded not because Egypt lacked culture, but because its inner coherence had already thinned. The Great Pyramid endured because it had already emptied. Its function had ceased long before invaders arrived. It posed no threat. It had become inert, safe to admire, and impossible to use. Yet inert does not mean irrelevant. The structure still encodes relationships modern science is only beginning to revisit. The links between environment and cognition, between resonance and perception, between alignment and awareness, remain active fields of inquiry. Modern neuroscience studies meditation and altered states in laboratories. Acoustic engineers investigate sound-induced neural entrainment. Physicists explore piezoelectric materials and geomagnetic influence. These domains quietly converge, rediscovering principles ancient builders may have applied holistically. The difference lies in intention. Modern research seeks efficiency and productivity. Ancient application appears to have sought transformation and restraint. One extends power outward. The other refines it inward. This distinction explains why ancient knowledge resists modern translation. It was not designed to scale, commercialize, or proliferate. It was designed to endure without spreading uncontrollably. The pyramid embodies this philosophy. It does not instruct or persuade. It waits. Those who approach it without synthesis leave unsatisfied. Those who bring integration sense something unfinished. This waiting is not passive. It is structural. A device meant to alter consciousness cannot announce itself. It must remain silent until approached correctly. History may never recover the pyramid's full operation. Too much context has dissolved. Too many variables have shifted. But recovery is not the only measure of value. Recognition matters. Recognizing that ancient civilizations may have prioritized internal development over external expansion reframes human history. It suggests that intelligence does not move in a straight line and that mastery can precede loss. The Great Pyramid does not demand belief. It demands seriousness, not as a tomb, not as a miracle, but as the remnant of a coherent system that once treated human consciousness as something to be shaped rather than ruled. In that sense, Giza is not a story about the past. It is a challenge extended into the present. When a civilization loses its deepest tools, it compensates by amplifying its surface forms. This is not decline in the obvious sense. It is inflation. Ritual expands. Symbol multiplies. Explanation thickens. Egypt after Giza illustrates this perfectly. The more distant it became from the original mechanism, The more elaborate its religious architecture and funerary practices grew. Temples rose across the Nile Valley, covered in reliefs and inscriptions. Walls spoke incessantly where the Great Pyramid remained silent. Gods proliferated into complex hierarchies. The afterlife became increasingly procedural. What began as a direct encounter hardened into a labyrinth of rules. This was not excess born of creativity. It was excess born of compensation. The Great Pyramid belongs to a different category. It does not narrate, it does not persuade, it does not instruct. It operates, or once operated, through exposure rather than explanation. This difference places it outside the normal evolution of religious monuments. It does not belong to a tradition of storytelling. It belongs to a tradition of conditioning. Conditioning requires control of environment. Light, sound, temperature, geometry, and isolation must be precisely managed. The pyramid does this without decoration or symbolism. Its corridors compress the body. Its chambers silence the senses. Its stone moderates temperature. Its proportions regulate resonance. Every element shapes experience before thought intervenes. Later, Egyptian structures abandon this approach. Temples are open, theatrical, visually dense. They engage the eye and intellect rather than suppress them. They teach doctrine rather than dissolve identity. This is not an improvement. It is a shift in strategy necessitated by loss. The priesthood becomes essential in this phase. When experience can no longer transform directly, intermediaries are required. Priests interpret, recite, guide, and enforce. Knowledge becomes performative rather than internal. Authority shifts from those who have undergone transformation to those who manage its memory. This shift produces stability, but of a different kind. It stabilizes belief rather than awareness. It preserves order rather than insight. Egyptian civilization becomes remarkably durable, yet increasingly rigid. Innovation slows. Forms repeat. Perfection is no longer sought. Preservation is. The pyramid's endurance thus becomes ironic. It survives physically while the system that gave it meaning collapses around it. By the New Kingdom, it is already a relic of unimaginable antiquity. Pharaohs visit it as pilgrims rather than participants. They honor it without understanding it. This gap between reverence and comprehension creates myth. Myths do not lie. They encode significance without mechanism. The pyramid becomes a ladder to the heavens, a tomb of gods, a cosmic mountain. Each metaphor captures an aspect of truth while obscuring the whole. Foreign cultures encounter the pyramid and add their own projections. Greeks see geometry and mystery. Romans see wonder and conquest. Medieval travelers see magic and prophecy. Modern tourists see spectacle. Each layer accumulates without replacing the previous one. The structure absorbs interpretation without yielding itself. This is the hallmark of a true artifact rather than a mere monument. A monument tells you what to think. An artifact forces you to ask why it exists at all. The Great Pyramid refuses narrative closure. It does not resolve. It provokes. Provocation becomes threat when it destabilizes foundational assumptions. This is why radical interpretations are resisted not on evidential grounds, but emotional ones. If the pyramid implies that advanced knowledge existed before recorded history, then modern civilization loses its monopoly on sophistication. If consciousness was once engineered deliberately, then modern ignorance is not innocence. It is neglect. Such implications are uncomfortable. They erode confidence in linear progress. They suggest that humanity may have solved problems it no longer remembers how to ask. This is not flattering to a culture built on novelty. Yet the pyramid does not accuse. It does not compare. It simply stands, offering a reference point outside our timeline. It measures us without judgment. The silence of Giza is often interpreted as absence. In reality, it is constraint. Silence preserves signal. Noise degrades it. A system designed to act on the nervous system must minimize distraction. Decoration, inscription, and spectacle would interfere. The pyramid's austerity is not minimalist taste. It is functional necessity. This understanding reframes vandalism and quarrying. When casing stones were stripped away, energy containment was broken. When the capstone vanished, discharge ended. When passages were opened and flooded with light and sound, isolation was lost. Each act degraded function without destroying structure. What remains is a husk. That husk still hints at its former role. Visitors report disorientation, emotional intensity, and altered perception inside the pyramid even today. These reports are often dismissed as psychological suggestion. Yet similar effects occur in caves, resonance chambers, and sensory deprivation environments. The pyramid still conditions experience, though weakly. This persistence suggests that the original system did not rely on belief. It relied on physics. Physics does not vanish when forgotten. It merely becomes inaccessible without proper configuration. The question then becomes whether recovery is possible. Could the pyramid be restored to operational state? In theory, perhaps. In practice, the risk would be enormous. A device capable of inducing profound altered states could destabilize individuals and societies if misused. The absence of instruction may itself be a safeguard. Ancient cultures may have understood this risk. Knowledge of consciousness is not neutral. It amplifies intent. Without ethical integration, it becomes destructive. Sealing the pyramid may have been an act of restraint rather than defeat. This casts the ancient builders in a different light, not as reckless geniuses, but as cautious custodians. They built something powerful and then ensured it would not proliferate uncontrollably. They left behind an artifact rather than a manual. Modern civilization tends to do the opposite. It publishes methods without mastering consequences. It scales technologies faster than ethics can adapt. In this context, the pyramid appears less primitive and more responsible. Responsibility, however, does not guarantee survival. Catastrophe erases nuance. The builders vanished or dispersed. Their priorities were not inherited intact. What remained was stone and silence. Silence invites speculation, yet speculation alone cannot recover function. Only synthesis can. The pyramid demands integration of disciplines modern systems keep separate. Until that integration occurs, understanding will remain partial. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a mismatch of orientation. Modern culture looks outward for solutions. The pyramid points inward. It is an inversion of focus. Whether humanity will ever realign with that focus is uncertain. The pyramid does not promise return. It offers reference. It shows that another way of engaging reality once existed, and that it left behind a structure precise enough to outlast memory. The greatest error is to reduce this to fantasy, or dismiss it as coincidence. The second greatest error is to idolize it. The correct posture is attention without projection. The Great Pyramid is not a message encoded in riddles. It is a condition encoded in stone. Its meaning is not hidden. It is inaccessible without context. And that may be the final lesson it offers, that knowledge without continuity becomes indistinguishable from mystery, and that the most advanced systems are not those that dominate the world, but those that can be safely forgotten when the world is no longer ready to use them. When the Great Pyramid is placed against the backdrop of modern civilization, the contrast becomes unavoidable. Today's world is saturated with information, yet starved of integration. Data accumulates faster than understanding. Technologies multiply while meaning thins. Against this noise, Giza appears almost alien in its restraint. It communicates nothing directly, yet conveys coherence through form alone. Modern societies equate knowledge with accessibility. Information is published, distributed, replicated, and scaled. Ancient monumental architecture suggests a different ethic. Knowledge was embedded, not broadcast. Access was limited by readiness rather than curiosity. This is not elitism. It is containment. A structure capable of altering consciousness or interacting with planetary systems would not be democratized casually. Such power would demand discipline, context, and ethical maturity. Restriction would be protection, not privilege. Giza's silence becomes intelligible under this ethic. It does not teach, it tests. Testing requires environment, not explanation. The pyramid does not instruct initiates how to think. It places them in conditions where thinking collapses. What remains is direct experience. This is the opposite of modern education, which prioritizes accumulation over transformation. The failure to recognize this difference leads to misinterpretation. Modern observers search for diagrams, instructions, blueprints. They expect knowledge to announce itself in symbols or text. The pyramid refuses this mode. It operates beneath language. This refusal frustrates analysis because it exposes a blind spot. Modern frameworks privilege explicit systems. Ancient systems may have privileged implicit ones. A culture that understood the nervous system as malleable would not explain transformation. It would induce it. The implications extend beyond archaeology. If ancient societies engineered consciousness through environment, then modern psychology is not inventing a new field. It is rediscovering an old one stripped of context. Meditation chambers, isolation tanks, sound baths, and neuromodulation echo principles once applied architecturally at scale. What differs is coherence. Modern interventions isolate variables. Ancient systems integrated them. Sound, geometry, darkness, pressure, and resonance worked together. The pyramid did not stimulate one sense. It reorganized perception entirely. This integration explains durability. A system dependent on devices fails when devices break. A system dependent on environment persists as long as environment persists. Stone outlasts machines. Geometry outlasts code. The pyramid's builders appear to have understood this. They chose materials and forms that resist entropy. They embedded function into mass rather than complexity. The result is a structure that remains operational at a low level even when damaged. Modern civilization builds the opposite way. It maximizes efficiency at the expense of resilience. Systems work brilliantly until they fail catastrophically. Giza works minimally but indefinitely. This is not technological inferiority. It is philosophical difference. Philosophy here is not abstract. It is embodied. The pyramid embodies a worldview that values alignment over output. It assumes the human mind is the critical interface. Everything else is secondary. This worldview conflicts with modern assumptions. Today, Power is externalized. Tools amplify force. Machines extend reach. Consciousness is treated as an afterthought, managed chemically or therapeutically rather than cultivated structurally. The pyramid reverses this priority. It invests enormous resources not in extraction or defense, but in shaping inner states. That investment makes no sense within a survivalist framework. It makes sense within a civilizational one. A civilization that engineers consciousness may not prioritize expansion. It may prioritize continuity. Such a civilization would not leave sprawling ruins. It would leave anchors, few sites precisely placed, designed to persist across upheaval. Giza fits this profile. It is not part of a dense urban network. It is singular. Its placement reflects planetary considerations rather than economic ones. It interacts with Earth rather than exploiting it. This interaction reframes the notion of technology. Technology need not dominate nature. It can cooperate with it. The pyramid does not dam water. It resonates with it. It does not alter the sky. It aligns with it. Modern environmental crises arise from technologies that ignore this principle. Systems designed without planetary integration produce unintended consequences. Ancient builders may have understood this limitation intuitively. If so, the disappearance of their civilization may not have been due to incompetence. It may have been due to fragility inherent in harmony-based systems. A system that does not dominate its environment cannot easily defend against abrupt change. Catastrophe favors brute force, not balance. When climate shifts violently, subtle systems fail first. Survivors adapt by simplifying, hardening, and externalizing power. This is how the post-cataclysm world emerges. Egyptian civilization may represent such an adaptation. It preserved memory through monument and ritual while abandoning the deeper integration that produced them. Over time, memory ossified into tradition. The Great Pyramid remained as a reference point, not a template. It could not be rebuilt because its conditions could not be recreated. The world had changed too much. Modern attempts to extract technological secrets from Giza often miss this. They seek mechanisms that can be replicated without context. They want power without philosophy. The pyramid resists this extraction. It offers no leverage without alignment. This resistance is its safeguard. It prevents misuse. A system that requires planetary, architectural, and psychological coherence cannot be weaponized easily. It is inherently defensive. Defense through complexity is modern. Defense through integration is ancient. The latter leaves fewer traces but greater endurance. The pyramid thus occupies a paradoxical position. It is both extremely advanced and deliberately limited. It does not scale. It does not propagate. It stands alone. This aloneness has been misread as primitiveness. In reality, it reflects restraint. The builders did not seek to transform the world. They sought to transform individuals within it. Such restraint feels alien in an age of acceleration. Yet it may be precisely what modern civilization lacks: the inability to pause, integrate, and recalibrate consciousness has consequences visible everywhere. The pyramid does not offer solutions. It offers contrast. It shows that another civilizational strategy once existed, one that prioritized depth over breadth. Whether humanity can learn from this without romanticizing it remains uncertain. The danger lies in projection. The pyramid is not a utopia encoded in stone. It is an artifact of a system that faced its own limits. Understanding those limits may be as important as admiring the achievement. The ancient builders may have reached a point where further development required restraint rather than expansion. That choice may have preserved balance until catastrophe intervened. Modern civilization has not yet faced that choice consciously. It accelerates without integration, accumulating power without coherence. Giza stands as a quiet counterexample. It does not argue. It does not warn. It simply demonstrates that intelligence can be expressed as alignment rather than domination, and that such expression can endure long after the culture that produced it has vanished. In this sense, the Great Pyramid is not an answer to modern problems. It is a calibration point, a reminder that advancement is not synonymous with accumulation, and that the most sophisticated technologies may be those that leave the smallest footprint on the world while leaving the deepest imprint on the human mind. At the edge of understanding, certainty dissolves. What remains is not confusion, but humility. The Great Pyramid forces this state because it resists completion. Every explanation accounts for something and fails to account for everything. This is not a flaw of theory. It is a property of the object itself. The pyramid was never meant to be fully grasped through description alone. Modern culture is uncomfortable with unresolved systems. We seek closure, labels, and final answers. Tomb or machine. Egyptian or pre-Egyptian. Symbol or technology. The pyramid refuses these binaries. It operates in overlaps. It belongs to multiple categories without being contained by any of them. This refusal is instructive. It reveals how deeply modern thinking depends on separation. We divide disciplines, isolate causes, and simplify narratives. The pyramid demands synthesis. It requires geology, astronomy, engineering, psychology, and mythology to be held together without collapsing one into the other. Such synthesis is rare not because it is impossible, but because it is demanding. It requires patience. It requires tolerance for ambiguity. It requires accepting that some systems are not optimized for explanation, but for experience. The Great Pyramid does not reward analysis alone. It rewards presence. Those who enter it report sensations that cannot be conveyed secondhand. Stillness, pressure, disorientation, heightened awareness. These experiences are often dismissed as suggestion, yet they occur across cultures and expectations. The environment imposes itself regardless of belief. This imposition suggests that the pyramid's primary language is not symbolic, but physiological. It communicates through the body. It alters perception through space, silence, and resonance. This mode of communication bypasses intellect and acts directly on nervous systems shaped by evolution to respond to environment. If this was intentional, it represents a form of intelligence rarely acknowledged, environmental intelligence. Rather than building devices that act upon the world, the builders shaped spaces that acted upon people. This is subtle power. It does not coerce, it conditions. Conditioning is not indoctrination. It does not impose ideas, it creates states. What emerges from those states depends on the individual. This makes the system resilient. It does not require uniform belief. It requires only exposure. Such a system cannot be mass-produced. It cannot be standardized. It depends on context, readiness, and restraint. This explains why it leaves few traces beyond stone. It also explains why it vanished when continuity was broken. Catastrophe erases networks before it erases monuments. Knowledge transmitted through lineage and practice collapses quickly, when populations scatter. Stone endures because it does not depend on memory. It waits. The pyramid's endurance may not be accidental. It may be the final expression of a civilization aware of its own fragility. Rather than attempting to preserve itself through dominance, it preserved reference points, anchors that could outlast memory. This reframes the notion of loss. What vanished was not simply technology, but orientation. A way of relating to the world that valued integration over control. When that orientation disappeared, later cultures inherited artifacts without frameworks. Modern fascination with the pyramid reflects this gap. We sense significance without context. We feel there is more, but lack the tools to access it. This produces speculation, skepticism, and polarization. Each response reveals as much about modern psychology as about ancient reality. Some reduce the pyramid to brute labor, stripping it of mystery to protect linear history. Others elevate it to supernatural origin, stripping it of human agency. Both extremes avoid the more difficult possibility that ancient humans were capable of forms of intelligence modern society has deprioritized. Intelligence need not manifest as rapid innovation. It can manifest as restraint, precision, and long-term thinking. A culture that builds once and builds well may leave fewer ruins than one that builds endlessly. The Great Pyramid was not part of an escalating trajectory. It was a singular convergence. After it, architecture diversified but did not deepen. Scale persisted. Precision diminished. The center moved from integration to expression. This pattern repeats in human history. Periods of coherence give way to periods of proliferation. Knowledge fragments, specialization increases, capability spreads, but depth thins. Eventually, systems become brittle. The pyramid stands outside this cycle. It is neither primitive nor advanced by modern standards. It is orthogonal. It represents a different solution to the problem of human development. That problem is not how to dominate the environment, but how to remain stable within it. The pyramid's design suggests that stability begins with the human mind. Change the environment that shapes perception, and behavior follows naturally. Modern systems attempt to regulate behavior externally through laws, incentives, and technologies. Ancient systems may have regulated it internally through initiation and environment. One approach scales easily, the other scales safely. Safety, however, does not guarantee survival. When conditions change abruptly, systems built on balance rather than force are vulnerable. The disappearance of the pyramid's builders may reflect this vulnerability rather than failure. Understanding this tempers romanticism. The ancient world was not a utopia. It faced limits. It made choices. Those choices preserved insight, but not continuity. The pyramid is what remains when continuity fails, but intention persists. It is not a blueprint. It is a residue. It does not teach methods. It demonstrates outcomes. This demonstration is subtle. It cannot be extracted, replicated, or commercialized. It can only be encountered. Those who demand answers leave frustrated. Those who allow questions leave changed. The Great Pyramid does not promise revelation. It promises orientation. It points toward a way of thinking that values coherence over accumulation, integration over expansion. Whether modern civilization can adopt this orientation without abandoning its own strengths remains uncertain. The pyramid offers no guidance on this. It simply stands as evidence that another orientation once existed and was expressed with extraordinary precision. In the end, the pyramid does not belong to the past. It belongs to anyone willing to approach it without projection. It does not require belief. It requires attention. Attention is rare. It cannot be automated. It cannot be outsourced. It is the one faculty that modern systems erode most efficiently. The Great Pyramid demands it. And in doing so, it reveals perhaps its most enduring function, not to provide answers, but to recalibrate the way questions are asked. At the end of inquiry, what remains is not resolution, but orientation. The Great Pyramid does not close a story. It opens a posture toward reality that modern civilization has largely forgotten how to hold. Standing before it, the impulse to explain weakens, replaced by the pressure to account. Not to conquer mystery, but to acknowledge depth. Depth is the pyramid's defining quality. Not height alone, not mass alone, but layered intention. Every stone carries multiple functions at once: structural, acoustic, thermal, symbolic, without advertising any of them. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is decorative without consequence. This compression of purpose is rare in any era. It signals intelligence disciplined by restraint. Modern culture tends to equate intelligence with visibility. Innovation announces itself. Progress demands recognition. The pyramid does neither. Its most sophisticated features are hidden. Its internal logic is inaccessible without effort. Its silence is not absence but filtration. Only those willing to slow down can even begin to perceive it. This is perhaps its most radical challenge. Modern systems reward speed. The pyramid requires patience. Modern systems reward output. The pyramid offers no output. Modern systems reward answers. The pyramid multiplies questions. Such an object is difficult to integrate into a worldview built on utility. It resists commodification. It cannot be simplified into a lesson or a product. It remains stubbornly whole. This wholeness is what endures. Empires fell around it. Languages vanished, religions transformed, technologies rose and collapsed. The pyramid remained not because it was worshipped, but because it was built to remain. It was designed to endure not just physically, but conceptually, without requiring maintenance of belief. Belief systems fracture under pressure. Structures grounded in physical law do not. Stone responds the same way regardless of who approaches it. Geometry does not care about ideology. Resonance does not change with theology. This universality is often mistaken for neutrality. It is not neutral, it is specific. It reflects a worldview that placed human perception within a larger planetary and cosmic system. A worldview that treated consciousness as something shaped by environment rather than isolated from it. Such a worldview does not fit comfortably into modern categories. It is neither purely scientific nor purely spiritual. It dissolves the boundary between the two. This dissolution is unsettling because modern identity depends on those boundaries. The pyramid exposes this dependence by ignoring it. It operates across domains without naming them. It does not separate function from meaning. It does not isolate mind from matter. It integrates. Integration is costly. It demands coherence across systems. It demands long-term thinking. It demands humility before forces larger than human intention. These demands conflict with the incentives of rapid expansion. The builders of the pyramid appear to have accepted these costs. They invested enormous effort into a single structure rather than dispersing it across many. They prioritized precision over proliferation. They chose permanence over scalability. This choice shaped what survived. When catastrophe arrived, whatever form it took, the pyramid endured because it did not depend on fragile systems. It did not require constant operation. It did not require cultural reinforcement. It simply remained. What did not remain was the context required to understand it fully. That loss is irreversible. The pyramid will never again function exactly as it once did. Too many variables have changed. The earth itself is different. The sky has shifted. The water has moved. But function is not the only measure of value. Reference matters too. The pyramid still demonstrates what alignment looks like. It still shows what coherence produces. It still stands as evidence that intelligence can be expressed without domination. This evidence challenges modern assumptions subtly but persistently. It suggests that technological sophistication does not require acceleration, that progress does not demand novelty, that depth can replace breadth. These suggestions are uncomfortable because they imply responsibility. If ancient civilizations achieved such coherence and lost it, then loss is not hypothetical. It is precedent. Forgetting is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of continuity. Modern civilization prides itself on continuity through storage, books, data, archives. The pyramid offers a different model, continuity through structure. Knowledge embedded in form rather than recorded in language. Language decays, formats change, servers fail, stone persists, geometry persists, physical law persists. Embedding knowledge into these is not primitive, it is strategic. The pyramid embodies that strategy. It is not a warning. It is not a prophecy. It is a demonstration of how knowledge can be preserved without being transmitted. This preservation is incomplete by design. The pyramid does not hand over understanding. It demands reconstruction. Anyone seeking to engage with it must integrate multiple disciplines, slow their thinking, and tolerate uncertainty. This is a filter, not an obstacle. Only a culture capable of synthesis can approach it meaningfully. Without synthesis, it becomes either myth or trivia. With synthesis, it becomes reference. The danger lies in misreading that reference. Romanticizing the past leads to imitation without comprehension. Dismissing it leads to arrogance without foundation. Both responses avoid responsibility. The responsible posture is attention combined with restraint. To observe without rushing to conclusion. To accept that some systems are not meant to be fully recovered. To learn from orientation rather than outcome. The Great Pyramid does not need to be activated to be relevant. Its relevance lies in what it implies about human capacity. That capacity is not limited to invention. It includes integration, patience, and foresight. These capacities are not obsolete. They are neglected. The pyramid stands as evidence that neglect is a choice, not a necessity. Whether modern civilization can reorient toward these capacities remains uncertain. The forces pushing toward acceleration are strong. Yet acceleration without coherence leads to instability. History shows this repeatedly. The pyramid survived instability by refusing acceleration. It did not multiply. It did not evolve. It remained exact. In that exactness lies its final lesson. Not that humanity once knew everything, but that humanity once chose carefully what to build. Not that ancient civilizations were superior, but that they valued different outcomes. The Great Pyramid does not belong to a lost golden age. It belongs to a moment of clarity that did not last. Its endurance is not a guarantee of return. It is a reminder of possibility. Possibility does not instruct. It invites. It asks whether intelligence must always move forward, or whether it can sometimes pause, integrate, and hold. The pyramid holds. It has held through millennia of forgetting. It holds still. And in that holding, it leaves the final responsibility where it belongs, not in stone, not in history, but in the choices of those who stand before it and decide what kind of civilization they intend to become.